Yeah, I'll have to apologise for the constant pings that are going on, messages flying around all week.
Yeah, I think we've just about gone. I think we've just about gone live, haven't we? So we'll give it another minute. Let people try and get signed into the event, and then we can get started.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Hi, Frankie. When it strikes past, we'll get started. Right, we'll make a start. Thank you everybody for tuning in on this Friday lunchtime. We're all very appreciative of it. My name is Josh Redshaw. I'm a Senior Account Manager here at Transition Partners. Not too sure how much you know about Transition Partners. We're an IT recruitment consultancy. We work across IT, business change, transformation, digital. We have an office in Berlin, so we cover a vast amount of the European market. We try to organise around about 30 events a year, normally from our Leeds office, but I'm pretty aware that everybody knows we've been through a global pandemic, so it's been difficult, but we've had a really, really great success in our virtual events. We've had the wider area of the UK market tuning in, watching our webinars, listening to our amazing panelists. So it's been a great success. Today, we have three amazing panelists in front of me here. So we've got Ulrich Street-Paulsen, Principal Product Engineer at Average Education, Rick Boyce, Technical Director at InfinityWorks, and Tim Lewis, Software Engineering Manager at The Zone. Now, we're going to be talking about our event, Creating Calm in Crisis. It's going to be touching upon successes, failures, things we could have done differently if we had the time back, but also talking about how COVID's affected our work, how we've kept our agile teams motivated, and hearing from the very top from the leaders of how they've been able to do that. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to the Software Engineering Manager at The Zone, Tim Lewis.
Hi all, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Appreciate taking the time out on a Friday. Obviously, Friday lunchtime, quite traditional for a lot of people. It might be time to sort of break off for work, head down the pub. So really, now you're allowed to do that. Appreciate you spending your time listening to us. It's really good. So yeah, I'm, as Josh has mentioned, I'm Software Engineering Manager at The Zone, specifically The Zone in Leeds, our Leeds office. For those who don't know, DAZN are an over-the-top media company that sort of essentially means we do media streaming, and we are basically concentrating on sports. We do live sports broadcast over the top. So kind of like people sort of call us the Netflix of sports, just to give you an idea of what we do. We haven't launched in the UK yet, so you might not have heard of us in that sense, but we are launched in nine countries around the world. And you know, we've seen some really great early success. So yeah, and for our part in Leeds, we have a dev centre of I think we've got about 40 to 50 people. For teams, and we're working on sort of operational tools and systems for the business. So that's kind of what we do. So I guess to start with, just to give a little bit of context, sort of when Josh asked me to sort of invited me to come and be a panelist, I was like, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. That's great. I like sort of sharing experiences and talking about stuff that we're up to, and also hearing, you know, everyone else talk and getting feedback and answering any questions people have. I think it's really super important that we, like as a community, certainly in for example in Leeds, we have quite a strong tech community, and it's really good that we get these opportunities to talk to each other and explain our, you know, detail our experiences and that. So onto the sort of the matter at hand, I suppose, how to keep calm in a crisis. It's a really interesting topic, because when you say crisis to someone, your immediate feeling is, this is a big thing, like a really big thing, and it's like it's so difficult to sort of contain, and I don't know what to do, and panic, and that's a perfectly normal human response to the unknown and to stuff that you can't control. And that's kind of what a crisis almost is, or at least seems to be. It's a situation that you can't physically or mentally get your arms around it, hold it, and make sense of it. And that's what this COVID-19 outbreak has been. It's been a crisis, absolutely. It's a global pandemic. It's a big, big thing. But when you start getting under the surface of it, it's like, how do you deal with this? You know, we have, as businesses, have been thrown a huge number of challenges by this that we weren't really expecting. Let's face it, I don't think anyone expected this beyond, you know, maybe a few experts of the World Health Organization who said, maybe this is coming, we should probably do something. But everyone's quite blasé. We're all, you know, it's been fine till now. I'm sure it'll keep going fine. And then bam, this comes out of left field, and you have to deal with it. And that's a crisis. But it seems like a big thing, and it is a big thing. But actually, there's not much we can do about a global pandemic in business. It's a thing that's happened, and what you need to do as a successful business is be able to react and adapt and change and do so as smoothly as possible to deal with something that is this big. And, you know, it is a big thing. And when you start getting under the surface of it, it's actually, I think, I've found that it's the small things that actually make the biggest differences, especially to teams who are trying to work together, and you know, businesses who are obviously still trying to operate and create and innovate. How do you do that when all of a sudden your normal safety nets are being ripped out from under you? And it is the small things that actually have the biggest impact on people. There's nothing I can do as a software engineering manager, you know, at a sort of, you know, a global company. There's not much I can actually do physically about COVID-19. It's a thing. There are experts who know way more about viruses and immunology and virology and all that than I could ever do. But we have to still try and keep a sense of normality. And I'll caveat that with a sort of a virtual asterisk, you know, what is normal. But, you know, we need to keep trying to keep things going. And as soon as you get any sort of large disruption that affects a group of people who are used to working with each other, or just being with each other, living with each other, just that kind of social bond, that's shaken. And probably one of the most important things you can do is try and make sure that your team or teams or your units of you know, units of people or your social circles, and there should be friends and family as well, you know, are your teams, are your people, how are they feeling? Are they safe? And, you know, how are they coping? Because the first thing that will absolutely hit any sort of productivity is people feeling scared and worried about something. And the best thing you can do, I think, certainly as the manager, is try and put people at ease as best they can. Like, look, we can do this. We've got like really clever, intelligent people. I'm really lucky. You know, the people I work with are just brilliant. They're amazing people, and they are adaptive, but, you know, and they're able to adapt and they're able to roll with stuff, but it's still difficult. And it's something that's really easy, certainly as a manager, to take that for granted, and you really kind of need to, you know, and I you know, I've probably at times not done as well on that as I probably would like to. If I'd had my time again, I might do a few things differently. But you need to create that almost kind of that psychological safety for people, especially in times where of uncertainty and fear and doubt, you know, around what's going on. And there is so much going on in the real world. So how do you keep people safe and feeling that they're still part of something, and still, you know, have their, you know, everyone goes to work and wants to have a purpose. They want to be able to create stuff, certainly in software engineering, want to be able to create useful software that people want to use. And, you know, how do we keep doing that? So getting people together and listening, and, you know, I think one-to-ones became way more important. You know, and actually quite a lot of my one-to-ones was throughout the last 4 or 5 months, whatever it's been, have been much more about, hey, how you doing? How's it going? How are you feeling about stuff? You know, is there anything I can help with? Oh yeah, let's talk about this thing. And kind of work becomes secondary in that sense. And while that might seem a bit odd coming from a manager, you know, first and foremost, I want my people to feel that they're safe and that they're supported. And you need to do that to then allow your teams to still continue working. So on, you know, obviously I've rambled on a little bit about that now. In terms of actual in the tech and how we make that happen, I think the biggest challenge with that is taking people out of that office environment and that social circle, that sociability that you get when you get everyone in the same physical location. That kind of the camaraderie and that energy you get off people being together. It's like, how do you replace that when we're all remote working? And that's super, super hard. Interestingly though, I think when we first went into lockdown, in many ways we saw productivity spike. We saw people do more. They'd lost commute times, so they were kind of more focused on work. They weren't like stressed out from having to deal with packed trains and all that sort of stuff. And that was good. And another kind of positive benefit we saw, and I think this was something that I think was really interesting for a lot of people, and there might be some questions about this later on potentially, is we're a distributed company and we've got offices, you know, we've got dev centers, we've got offices all over, but our dev centers, we've got obviously Leeds, we've got one in Amsterdam, we've got in Hammersmith, and we've got in Katowice in Poland, and one in Kosice in Slovakia as well. And one of the things we observed was as soon as we went into lockdown, our communication with the other offices improved, because all of a sudden everyone is on the same playing field. We're all remote, so we're all having to deal with remote communication at the same time, and we lose all that that kind of horrible Americanism, I guess, a water cooler sort of talk. You know, when I go make a cup of coffee, I might overhear one of my colleagues talking about something. I go, oh, that's interesting. Tell me a bit about. You lose that, but you lose it everywhere, and that then forces people in different offices to talk to each other more, which is kind of, that was a nice pro of this, I think. And you sort of take that and go, right, okay, that's interesting. And up until very recently, and I think I've been on the wrong track until, like, I think it was like this week I had a conversation with one of my colleagues about it. And we're thinking, how do we recreate that water cooler conversation? How do we recreate that ad hoc discussion that seems to form a part of office life? And maybe, you know, especially if we're down now thinking, are we going to go fully remote? Is that a thing that we're going to do as a business going forward? Or are we going to do more remote working? I think probably yes, a lot of businesses are going to. This is going to be more of a thing as we go forward. So maybe asking that question is like, how do we recreate that water cooler conversation? Maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the question we should be asking is, how are teams communicating with each other? And what are we doing wrong that we're relying on ad hoc chance conversations to fill a gap? What is that gap exactly? And what tools do we need to get? And what tools maybe do we need to create to make that something that isn't a thing that we rely on anymore? And you know, I am an absolutely super strong believer in getting people in the same physical location for that socialization, the energy, the camaraderie. But we should also be able to operate remotely better than maybe we have been doing. And it comes down to that, how do we communicate effectively? And if I had the answer to that, I think I'd probably be a very, very rich man right now. And I don't. And I'm really interested in hearing other people's thoughts on that, especially, and how we can maybe improve that communication, how we get teams talking to each other more effectively, constantly, without needing it to be managed. And it can't be video conferences all the time. It doesn't work. It eats too much time. So if there's one thing I will take out of this whole lockdown crisis, I think, and I'm not lying here when I say this is literally someone's flipped my mind on this week. Is like, how do we improve communication between teams so that we don't rely on those ad hoc communications? And I think that's a big question that I need to answer, or I would love to answer. And I think if we are as an industry going to move to a more remote working model, which does seem to be the way people are talking, how do we solve that communication problem to make it a natural thing? As natural as overhearing someone having a chat about something when you go and get yourself a coffee. And so I guess, I had a natter for 15 minutes. I'll throw it open with that question to others to say, and have a think about how do we do that? How do we address that? And I think that's an interesting discussion point.
Yeah, brilliant, Tim. And me as an avid sports fan, I think you see it from the wider area that you don't see sports on the screen, you start to panic, you start to realise what's going on inside the business. So that's massively insightful. And just for the guys tuning in, there's a Q&A section there. So if you've got any sort of question for Tim, Ulrich or Rick, please do ask and direct it at them. But if you want it to be open, please leave it open, and I'll try and get through as many as possible. I'll pass you over to Ulrich Street-Paulson now from Arbor Education to take us forward.
Yeah, hi there. Hi, my name is Ulrich Street-Paulson. I work for Arbor Education. I've been with Arbor Education now for about 9 years. I want to just get a little bit of context about what kind of company we are. We run what's called a management information system for schools, and we've got offices in London and Leeds and also in Belgrade. And what is a management information system? Well, it's a system that does everything that has to do with running a school. So you could almost see a school like a microcosm of the world. It's so from a feature product perspective, that means we have some statutory requirements. We have to take attendance, manage assessment, exams, student and staff records. And we also help schools log behavior and academic achievement, do some analysis. We also do payments for meals, clubs and trips, and do communication with parents and HR and much more. So it's a very large system in that sense. And it touches a lot of different stakeholders within the school community. From a technical perspective, what that means, it means that it's an enterprise application. As most people probably know, the schools are not the most well-funded of institutions. So it's an enterprise application that's run on a relatively small budget. And in my role, I sort of serve as a bridge between product and engineering. I do some engineering, but increasingly I sort of advise and consult on our various feature teams. I think I'll jump straight to Tim's point earlier on about how do we get people to communicate in a time where we are not sort of just meeting each other by the water cooler and dropping into conversations. And maybe not so much from a business perspective, but from a personal perspective, it also feeds into sort of psychological well-being. What I think what we did as a company during this crisis here is I was very sort of focused on health and mental well-being. So we have through the entire period here, we've been focused on a lot of health and well-being events. Everything sort of that we run online for each other. Some of the classes have been done by Arbor employees. We've also had some outside people coming in and doing things for us, and we've run classes in sort of mindfulness, mental health, yoga, inclusion, cooking, baking, have had quizzes, even lunchtime dance classes that was delivered by one of our product managers, art classes, and some events for children as well. So we've sort of tried to make sure that everyone had something in work hours that was not just work. On top of that, our CEO sort of had some daily updates with some small competitions for us all to take part in, which I think, going back to Tim's point about this water cooler conversation, would start conversations between people that wouldn't normally interact otherwise. And like Tim also said, it really levels the playing field. So some of these competitions were like, take a picture of your favorite place in the house, or your fondest, or write about your fondest childhood memory, or your best holiday story, or your favorite meme or pet hate or something like that. And I feel actually that during the last 3 months, I've to a large extent, gotten to know many of my my co-workers much better than I did before, and not just in the office that I normally go to, but across the entire company. And that's been, I think, Arbor has handled that very, very well, and it's something I really hope that we can continue afterwards. So that's sort of one side of the crisis, is, you know, how do you deal with it within your own company? For us, we sort of had, there was a couple of other dimensions to it as well, in that we work with so many different schools. So for our schools, they also saw a crisis, in that their world was more or less thrown upside down. They had new regulations to have to adhere to, new advice, completely new ways of working. And the third sort of side of the crisis for us was for our product, with all these new regulations that came into play and all these new ways of working for the schools. We all of a sudden saw a spike in new feature requests, and how we were going to deal with those feature requests, and also deal with the statutory requests that were being put upon us, sort of became a big thing. So if I'm just going to sort of leave the more sort of pastoral side of it to a side now, and just go into how we dealt with some of those. So for our schools, what we did was we made sure that there were frequent updates. We've had a lot of webinars for our clients, and we've made sure that they, could continue to access the support and all the guidance and all the advice that we give them on a day-to-day basis. We sort of very quickly, even before we went into lockdown, we had a couple of trial runs of trying everyone working at home, so everyone can access all the support that we should give them from our customer team as well. And that went very well. So we actually went into lockdown ourselves slightly earlier than lockdown was advised, or was put upon us rather. And just like with Tim, we interestingly, in the engineering team, we saw an uptick in production, on productivity to start off with. It's kind of leveled out again as the period has gone on, but it was very interesting to see that happening. And I think one of the things we need to be careful with when all of a sudden everyone's working from home and don't have the commute, is that transition time between work and home. I myself find it sort of difficult to switch off. Sometimes the commute time is what gives you the time to switch off, and walking down the stairs isn't quite enough sometimes to switch off. And again, that's something I think as a company we've been pretty good at telling our employees that, and our co-workers, that they have to look after themselves, and if they need some time, take that time to look after yourself, and that's the most important thing, really. In terms of sort of what we did to support our schools, this was also really, really interesting, sort of an interesting crisis, as it were. It was slightly trickier than dealing with the other two sides of it, because we were dealing with such a rapidly changing situation. Of course, we have a roadmap, just like everyone has, that we'd like to work to, but all of a sudden we're just seeing suggestions coming in from all sides, internally and externally, about how we should improve or change our product, and as well as new statutory requirements for reporting and so forth. And of course, all the suggestions that we're getting, they're coming from a good place, and we know that we not only do we want to do something, we have to do something, but how do you weigh that up when you get sort of in the space of 2 days 50 proposals for what you should be doing? I guess a knee-jerk reaction would have been very easy to have. We tried to resist that as much as we could. We knew, for example, that everyone will be teaching from home all of a sudden. So what should we do? Should we make Arbor into a virtual learning environment and add video conferencing? That would have been a quick reaction to do that. That was one of the ones that were quickly sort of voted down. What about tracking key worker children? We knew that was going to be a requirement. That was sort of a more low-hanging fruit that we decided to go with. And in order to to sort of prioritize all these things, we set up a task force where we had members of the task force that were representing all the different stakeholders, both within the company and also outside. So we had our users represented by our support forum manager and our second line support and customer service. We had our product department, so head of product and product managers, comms writers, and myself from the technical side of things. And we started just collecting suggestions and intelligence from everywhere. And we kind of went very low tech with the whole thing, just a simple spreadsheet to keep it really quick. And then every morning we would talk through all suggestions and we'd rank them in terms of sort of their importance and the impact, the reach they would have, how they would impact our clients, how they would help our schools, how to help them navigate through this difficult situation. But also weighing it up against the technical difficulty, including some considerations of how much effort that would be required to sort of unpick any changes that we were doing to our software. So it wouldn't be just as difficult for us to go back to normal. Once we go back to normal, we're by no means there yet. There's still lots of new stuff coming out from the DFE all the time, but we're keeping that in mind all the time. And like Tim said, it's about controlling those variables. What can you control? There are so many rumors floating around about what's going to happen next, what's going to happen to schools, how they're going to open. And very often we wouldn't know anything until the day before they happened. So we try to just stick to and react to the facts that we were giving. That's one of the things that we could control. If we talk about sort of the agile way of which we were doing it, we would then, once we sort of prioritized everything, we would stick everything that we decided to do on a Kanban board and just work from there. And then a key part of it as well was to align communication to our schools who found themselves like us in this very, very new situations where they would need more hand-holding from and support for all the different guidance that came out from the DFE. I think I read somewhere that by the end of June, from March, since we went into lockdown, and to the end of June, there was more than 120 either new or changed guidance documents issued to the sector. So there was an awful lot for school leaders and for us to plow through constantly, and being able to help them manage their crisis as well was key for us. This was also, and that's pretty much what we did all the time, just every day, a new meeting, responding to what had happened the day before, and then just clear communication to schools, pushing out any new features, and then just rinse and repeat. There were also periods of calm, of course, where we sort of could resume our sort of normal daily life. But there were also, and then there were periods of very, very high intense activity, like when lockdown was announced, when it was announced that key workers and vulnerable children could come into schools, then the phased reopening, then further reopening, and now the full reopening. So they're sort of, our period has sort of been punctuated by those intense periods of work. And sort of on the whole, it's gone very well. We've had a lot of positive feedback from almost all our schools, but are there things we could do better? Most definitely. And a little while ago, sort of after the first sort of main periods, we had a retro to discuss all that and have documented our entire process with all the sort of do's and don'ts, so we can repeat all the things that went well in the future, if and when something similar should happen again. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in September when schools actually return. But this time, I think we feel that we are even more ready. It was a little bit ad hoc what we did to start off with, but we found that most of the things that we were doing were working quite well. And again, going back to what Tim was saying, that it's often the small things that make a big difference. So it's been the small things for us as a company of getting people together and having those little quizzes and competitions. They've made a huge difference to people, but also for our schools, the small improvements that we made without completely tearing our software apart have actually made a big difference as well. As we sort of introduced as many new things as we didn't do. So it's been about half and half there. And what could we have improved? we certainly had a few knee-jerk reactions to start with that we probably could have avoided. Not so much in terms of features, but more in terms of suggestions and advice to schools that didn't quite pan out the way we thought it would. It didn't maybe quite meet the requirements, but we were able to make up for that again later on. Perhaps we had at times a slight over-reliance on a few sort of vocal sources within our school community from our forums and from our sort of more vocal clients. And then there was a couple of internal things where we went ahead with a theme development day at the height of the crisis, where we maybe should have postponed it a little bit. But they were really small things. Overall we felt that we settled on a pretty good process on it after a few days.
Thank you, Ulrich. Yeah, thank you very much. I really do appreciate that. And we all know, as being parents, never mind the stress that you had to go through in education. It was hard enough homeschooling our own children. So it was good to get an insight from you there. And Rick, obviously, I know you've come from that educational background, so you can really touch upon and feel the pain of what Ulrich's been through previously, and hopefully give us an insight into what's been happening at Infinity Works. So, Rick, over to you.
Yeah, it was an interesting coincidence to be speaking alongside Ulrich. We worked in the same sector. I worked for a company that effectively consumed the data out of systems like ours for a long time, and I was smiling a lot during his talk, because I absolutely recognise those days when a few hours before results day or some key day in the school year, that thousands of teachers were geared up for, a sort of ambiguous and vague correction document would appear from the Department for Education, and we would sort of spend long evenings with Peter and all of that, trying to figure out what on earth it meant and what were we going to say to all these teachers tomorrow. So no, I totally sympathise. So I think what I was going to do is sort of use this as an opportunity to think through for myself. Well, what actually is crisis and what is calm? If that's what I want to create. Is that what we've done in lockdown? Is that what we've done in other crises? So sort of, did that thing, started Googling, and there's this nice quote from John F. Kennedy that says, when it's written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters. One represents danger and the other represents opportunity. Now, absolutely no idea if that's factually accurate, but it kind of works for this session, right? So I'm just going to run with it. I quite like the sound of it. Danger and opportunity. Sounds cool. The opportunity bit is interesting, so let's get to that later. But I'm going to spend a bit of time looking at the danger from the point of view of, traps I've fallen into over a career of many times being on the, in crisis, sometimes through my own creation and sometimes through external factors. As we've talked about before, I'm Rick. I'm one of the team from Infinity Works. I normally say in Manchester, but right now actually we're a collective of 400 plus talented people who are working in homes and dining room tables and in the vicinity of small noisy children up and down the country, just like everyone else is. So we're sort of a nationally distributed company of engineers working on software development and platform work in clouds and digital transformation for our clients. So we get the fun of seeing the sort of the crisis of COVID or a lot of other crises that people bring to us, both from our point of view in terms of how do we deal with our people, and the client's point of view, how do we achieve the right outcome for them, which is the crucial bit in a consultancy. So at the start, creating calm in crisis, I kind of want to break that up. There's three words in there that are interesting: creating, calm, and crisis. So let's explore them a little bit. Crisis, right? What is crisis? Well, if you Google it, it says it's a time of intense difficulty or danger. Wow. So I thought, well, where do we fit into that? If I went to all of my team members, all of my people, and said, what is work life to you? Would any of them tell me that it was a time of intense difficulty or danger? Yeah, the sort of sad truth is that, in any technical organization, that there will always be some crisis going on. But it really shouldn't be, crises should not be routine. They shouldn't be every P1 incident, every last minute change from, a government body, as I and Ulrich can relate to, or from the business or from anywhere else, just change generally. It shouldn't be the resignation or the transfer or a happy promotion of one of our people. Shouldn't be an unexpected technical hurdle. These things are not crises, but they are in a lot of development organizations today. So eliminating that, certainly easier said than done. But I guess that's part of the opportunity, right? That the upside to a crisis is there is an opportunity to improve. And I think the heart of what we aim to do as technical people working in a modern agile world is to take every opportunity that we have to improve and really jump on it. So yeah, let's park that one for the creating bit, ducking the real work down the road. But I also want to share a few experiences. So what are some things in terms of crisis that I've seen, good and bad, in people? Well, the one that really stands out in my head is when people tell me that they are a shield for their team. I shield my team, and there's something sort of admirable about this. We work with some fantastically talented and passionate people, and a lot of them really do show a commitment to their team that is often to their own personal detriment. But I'm always careful to explore with them, well, what do you mean by shielding? So one interpretation could be, well, it means that we've got a way to control work in progress, that the team aren't being overwhelmed by random questions and stuff coming in. Yeah, okay, that's healthy. We need that, especially in a crisis. The worst thing in a crisis is that you're trying to get your team aligned in a direction, in the right direction, hopefully, and then everybody else in the business who shares this same crisis is coming in with their little piece. That's going to be an absolute killer. I'm sure we've all been in situations where we've seen that. So yes, some shielding is valuable, but not shielding from reality. I think if I've learned one thing over my career about communication, it's that however much you do and you think you need, you still need to do more. And definitely in a crisis, that's doubly true. So if you've built a team of smart people, a perception of a lack of communication or a leader that's sort of overly shielding, not being transparent or forthcoming with context and information is really going to alienate them. It also, as an example I'll share later on, might obscure the fact that maybe you've already got the information to deal with this crisis in front of you. So one I'd say to watch out for is shielding can be valuable in terms of protecting the flow state of your team from interruption, especially in a crisis. But arguably, most of the time, I think if you survey developers and ask them what the worst thing in the world is, it's normally interruptions, right? And sort of people who've moved into less developer orientated strands of work like me seem to like creating interruptions of lots of meetings and calendars, unfortunately. So protecting the flow of your team, shielding, valuable. Shielding as a hiding your team from reality, hiding away the context, something to be wary of. It happens. And it can also come up with sort of martyrs and heroes as well. As I've said, the personal commitment some people show is always remarkable. And I can think of colleagues at the beginning of COVID in Infinity Works who had clients who suddenly needed hundreds of people to work from home or be onboarded into new systems. And the temptation to take that work on and jump on it like the proverbial grenade while the rest of the team soldier on with normality, it is not only quite dangerous for that person, but it's also a little bit alienating. It can be seen as patronizing by others in the team. So be careful of that. It's great to show commitment to solving a problem, but not when it comes at the cost of a team's ability to learn and improve and refine things for the next crises that are going to come along. And I'll talk about that in a bit. So on crisis, well, of course they're always going to come up, right? We live in the real world. It'd be lovely to say eliminate all your crises, but we didn't see COVID coming, and we do, for example, thinking about some of Ulrich's examples, we do sometimes find ourselves in situations where an avoidable crisis in the large is unavoidable from our point of view. It's outside of our sphere of influence. But the way that we reframe the day-to-day crises into business as usual, into a well-honed process, is actually kind of the same stuff that we need to do to prepare for the real crises. So, thinking with that way in mind, I'd argue is a pretty helpful thing. So, word 2, calm. Calm. That sounds so nice, doesn't it? Again, look, definitions, I like these. Like the calm. One of the definitions of calm is the absence of wind. Great, love it. Now, I'm really keen on sailing, so ironically for me, if I go to a sailing event and there's the absence of wind, I'm actually really unhappy. Maybe it is a minor crisis, it's certainly disappointing, but ignoring my somewhat unusual sports specific needs. Imagine that walk down a narrow street between some tall buildings on a really windy day, right? Yeah, you can get out of there at the end of it, pushing, being ruffled all the way along. But you're probably not going to be that motivated to do it again next time you run out of oat milk or whatever it is first thing in the morning. But think about that same morning stroll for your oat milk in the absence of wind. It's a delight. You're thinking about the day, you're laying your schedule out in your head. You've already written half those emails that you don't actually want to sit down and write. You just need to tap them out on your phone. It's great. Yeah, the absence of wind, the absence of turbulence, the absence of disruption. And I think it sort of plays into what I was beginning to get to in terms of crisis, that one of the best things we can do to handle crises that come up is make it a little bit business as usual, is to have robust enough processes and ways of operating as a team or as a business that, every little gust of wind doesn't become a major crisis, a major interruption to the team. We can get on, with our day, and we can handle it in a sustainable way. So I'm going to sort of argue that really what that calm bit is getting at is it's about the headspace and the safety needed to do things well, to do things properly. If we find ourselves constantly in crisis, well, what does that lead to? We get technical debt, we burn out our people, we don't develop them, we don't have continual learning. We'll destroy and burn our relationships with others around the business as things get more fractious. To me, like, if you're a coding horror fan, if you've sort of read those blog posts time and time again over the years, like I have, calm is the difference between falling into the pit of success or the pit of failure. And if you've never read it, I'd suggest having a quick Google for Coding Horror's Pit of Failure blog. It's one of my favorites. So again, thinking back to, putting some specific examples of this, so I'm going to try and find one that didn't come from me. And I'm going to talk about blame, because I think something that is absolutely an anathema, something that's completely incompatible with calm in a crisis or normally, is blame culture. So I think that, there's always this kind of, thing about, we know that blame cultures are bad, right? In crisis management, we should be quick with facts, and we shouldn't bring blame into it. It's easy to sort of say that, but actually, I'd argue that a blame culture is subtler than that. And I'll give an example of sort of a situation where you might spot it. So my dad was a police officer. He ran for a time incident responses, all sorts of things. When the post 9/11 terrorism scares were happening, that there was a lot of sort of very difficult to understand incidents around that. But also, the work of things like the police involve crises all the time, a missing vulnerable person. Well, that's absolutely, an earth-shattering crisis in somebody's life if your loved one is missing and you're concerned about their ability to handle the scary world out there. That, you absolutely do not want a chaotic interaction with an agency that's supposed to be helping you. So he gave me an example of this, and it was just that. It was a vulnerable person who'd gone missing. And so we started talking about, well, what was the problem and how did you solve it? And of course, the answer was communication. Let's take that as a given. It just wasn't in quite the way that I expected. So the example he gave me about this vulnerable missing person was one that he'd stepped in as an incident commander, halfway through. Situation wasn't going well. And the team were doing hourly stand-ups. He didn't know it was called a stand-up. I told him it was called a stand-up. I was like, yeah, it turns out you were doing this stand-up business way before I was. But basically, the whole team would get together, they'd stop what they were doing, and they would say what they were doing. What was all of the stuff that they'd done that day, that hour? What were their officers out there doing? And as the crisis had gone on, this just turned into an ass covering exercise. Everyone was desperately repeating what they tried without making any progress, in the hope that just doing enough stuff would clearly mean that the failure, the blame for the failure of making progress couldn't possibly lie with them, because they were doing loads, they were doing everything they could, if not more. So what change do you bring to that situation? What brings calm and what brings focus? Well, Dad's answer in that situation was pretty simple. He just sent everyone away in an hour to come back with what had they learned. There would be no yelling and shouting at officers and teams whose actions had yielded no progress or no information. Those people did the best that they could have done with the information available to them. Instead, it would be about putting around the table, what do we know? What progress have we made? What have we learned? And this led to a discussion then about, well, if that's what we know, what are the gaps that we have to go and plug? And it turns out in this example, I'm sure the reason Dad picked it was because he's got a bit of a sense of pride in probably a rare victory in a stream of situations that didn't really go this well. But in this particular case, this person was found very soon after that stand-up, because the team already had the information needed to find this person. They knew where they were. The information was distributed. Because people were so focused on saying what they were doing instead of what they knew, what they had learned, and what they had failed to learn, none of that information was ever brought together. And actually, all of the information needed to locate this person safely and reunite them with their family was there. And, if you've ever had the privilege to see a really fantastic incident response team in action, you'll see that it looks a lot like this too. There's a very strong no blame culture, not in the sense of this is your fault, in the sense of, we try things based on what we know, we do our best, and we aren't going to yell at each other for not making progress. We're going to talk about changing our strategy, changing our plan. No blame culture is deeper than pointing that finger at that person and yelling at them. It's about creating a situation, an environment where people don't even feel, it doesn't even cross their mind to spend the time in that stand-up covering their ass. It crosses their mind to focus on the problem at hand. So a more personal example, I suppose, from the COVID lockdown, although I was trying to avoid talking about this because I suspected that the guys before me would have done a fantastic job, which they had, I will mention it a bit because another flip side to this was going into lockdown, a very different kind of crisis, a personal one for people, because suddenly, two working parents or a single working parent with kids at home, or somebody who might have a mental health issue, who is used to a social network day to day through work that supports them, suddenly finds themselves isolated, in a flat. Everybody's personal response to COVID was completely different. And so something that we felt very strongly was crucial to do at Infinity Works at the beginning of this was to be very, very clear that we absolutely understood that everybody's response would need to be different, and that we had no expectations that everyone would do the same. If you needed to come to us and talk about doing less billable hours, changing working patterns, work early so you could have the afternoon off to school your kids while your partner was doing the flip side, we were up for that conversation. There was no hard rules, there was no framework, there was no numbers, there were just conversations to recognize that we totally get that everyone is going to have a legitimately different response to this. And because you're not dealing with your kids or whatever in the same way as this other person, it's absolutely fine. This is about what's right for you. So again, that sort of blame thing can also come into expectations. If we hold up specifics and sort of implicit expectations of people, we can all, we can create a sort of guilt or an alienation in those that need something different. So I'd argue that as far as creating calm goes, thinking through how subtle a blame or a kind of guilt culture can be in an organization is really key, and really reflecting on, what are the practices to flip that conversation around about facts and actions and learnings and things that we can do differently, in the right way for the team, the situation, or the person. So I suppose I'm going to have to talk about creating, which is probably the little tricky bit, right? This is the bit I'm sure you all came for. How do you actually create calm rather than what is calm? Okay, I'm going to give it a shot, and you can yell at me in the question section if you think I got it completely wrong. But here's kind of my feeling on this, that what we've talked about, I think we've identified the ingredients that we need to create for calm in the midst of a crisis. We've talked about getting, in place the communication and the continuous, improvement and learning approach, and all of these things that we need to do. We need to do something now to sort of bring them together. I don't think as leaders that we can continually create an illusion or calm from nowhere in a situation. It has to come from our people knowing what they were doing, like the incident response team that sees the P1 goes off and is on it because they've practiced it 100 times before. Real calm in the crisis is going to come from our people knowing how to execute, not from us trying to conjure something over and over again. So again, looking back to sort of quotes, well, Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, has this quote that if you don't choose to do it in leadership time up front, you do it in crisis management time down the road. It's interesting. I think it's a bit waterfally. I don't know if I agree with the words, but I love the spirit of it, that actually this is something that needs to come from our people, needs to come from continuous improvement. But if we don't commit to it as leaders, if we don't make the time and the space for it to happen, we're certainly never going to create it, not in a sustainable way, not every time something goes down. So let's try and make it a bit agile. So as I said, I think we've kind of talked about the ingredients for this, you know, that resiliency to handle the unexpected in a sustainable way without, you know, falling over, without stopping delivering, without burning our people out. I'd argue comes down to good communication with transparency and context and safety, by avoiding some of those pitfalls, by avoiding a bit of shielding or hero cultures, blame, and sort of all of the ass covering stuff that we've talked about. So I'd say that the last bit in creation is the commitment from us leading our team to act on this. I used to work, I'm sure Ulrich does now, in a high data compliance situation. You know, we were dealing with the data of hundreds of thousands of young people up and down the country in the school system. It was highly important that that was very, very secure. You know, not only for the reputation of the business, but also the personal safety of all of those, you know, young people. So it's a very high bar that we set ourselves there. And it was an ISO auditor, actually. It was someone who, after we'd set a set of security processes up, was working with us on going through all of that and auditing. And what they said to me was that the end of the crisis is actually just the beginning of it. You know, the real crisis is how do you respond to it after? You either create the value by learning from it, or you walk away to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. You know, and there's a sort of matching quote from the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, who said that good governance is not firefighting or crisis management. Instead of opting for ad hoc solutions, the need of the hour is to tackle the root cause of the problems. And yeah, I'm totally on that. So I'm just going to leave a couple of open questions to finish off. Are we giving our teams the reminder that agile is a process to deliver value, and crises are things that destroy value? So it is absolutely a responsibility of that team to think about in their process, how do they create a sustainable response to the unexpected, a sustainable response to crisis? Do we care about calm enough as leaders to show our people that we commit to making time and space needed to create it? And I guess I'm going to come right back to the start of Tim's talk, because Tim said that it was the amazing people he works with that have made moving into isolation and COVID a success. And I absolutely agree with him. And I'd argue that perhaps Tim's organization is one that has actually lived this out, that the reason going into lockdown wasn't a crisis was because we'd already done the work. We'd already given the commitment to our people so that they knew what to do. They had trust in us as leadership, that we would listen to them and respond to their needs without judging. We'd made the space up front to create that calm. So when the crisis came, you know, some of us were fortunate enough to walk into it without the sky falling in.
Yeah, I'll completely agree with you there, Rick. You know, and I think one thing we forget as well, or not forget, but that we should think about as well, that actually a crisis can come with a lot of energy as well, and people can be energized from it when they have an opportunity to do something when you're in a crisis. But it requires the calm in order to channel that energy in the right way, and it has to be coordinated in the right way, and definitely assuring people and showing people that they are supported, and knowing that you have your processes in place. That's what allows you to actually, you know, capitalize, as it were, on the opportunity side of the crisis as well.
Yeah, I'd echo that as well. I think if you give, I'll come to Rick's point actually about everyone's different. Everyone deals with crisis in a different way, and you know, the lockdown thing is like, we've got people who have got kids and they're stuck at home with kids all day, and there's homeschooling to think about, and that's difficult. And you need to give people the time to cope with that and deal with it, and you know, let people have that space and give them that safety that they can do it without being judged. And again, the blame culture stuff is excellent. It is so important to get away from that, because it's just so counterproductive. And yeah, you know, we are very fortunate at the Zone in that we already had remote working as a thing, and we've just, you know, extended it. So it's just having the freedom yourself as a manager, a leader, to sort of go, you know what, yes, I know you specifically, your situation here is really super difficult. Take some time. Just you do what you can do. get your, again, I'll stress this so many times, it's like the individual is super important. You make everyone feel like they're safe. And, you know, when people go, oh, we're behind on this work, it's like, work will still be here next week, it'll be here next month. What I don't want is for anyone to really suffer because of this. You keep your people safe, 100%. And, you know, and I think that's super important. You know, I'm lucky in that DAZN have really supported that sort of viewpoint as well. And I've worked in places in the past where that isn't the case, and the difference in morale of your teams is like huge. You know, happy people, you know, do good work.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. And it was great for Rick to not just on the tech market, but more like your first response team and how they've created calm, and your dad doing stand-ups many years before probably we did it. So it's nice to know that's always been in fashion. And just before we get to the Q&A section, this is all recorded for YouTube, so please do give us a follow on there and be able to watch this video back, as well as all of our podcasts and webinars. Please do follow us on LinkedIn as well, just for the up and coming events also. Now, we'll break on to some Q&A, because we've got around about 5 minutes. So the first one here is from an anonymous attendee, and I think it's been answered. So we'll move on to Rose. For Tim, as you spoke about taking a lot of our communication online rather than physical, have you or any of your team found it that it's harder to check out after work and separate that time?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I was thinking a type of quick response, and then figured it actually probably needed a wider sort of context to it. It's difficult. And I think it's easier for some people than it is others to do just on a psychological profile, you know, builds. You know, we're all different, we all deal with things, we all have different life experiences that builds our character and our psyches up, and, you know, everyone deals with these sorts of things in different ways. It's also, we're all in completely different physical situations. And I've said to people before, I was so super lucky that I managed to move house to where I am now. Not 100-acre wood, promise. Before this all happens, and I'm now lucky that I've got my own room, that's my room to do my stuff in, but I can then separate myself from work by going to the living room, the kitchen, spending time with the family, etc. Not everyone's got that. You know, some people are stuck in little bed sits, and you know, and that mental load, although a lot of people are still very, like, you know, stoic and like, yes, we can get through it, that's so hard. That is so difficult to deal with. And, you know, we have to be very cognizant of that and be aware and help that. So in terms of being able to check out, yeah, that is more of a challenge for some than others, I would say. But I think it also challenges this kind of concept that we do 9 to 5 as work. And, you know, I've heard some horror stories from other places where, you know, there's been messages sent round to people saying, you know, putting the dishwasher on during work hours isn't doing work. I was like, that's just horrific. I mean, good Lord, you know, if I've seen anything, is like people are clocking onto work earlier and they're leaving later because they're not traveling. But yes, go and hang the washing out, do the washing up, spend an hour with your kids teaching them whatever lesson they need to be doing. That 9 to 5, I think we need to sort of challenge anyway, to a degree, and let people do the work that they need to do in the time that suits them, especially in this sort of situation where it is you know, a crisis. So yeah, it's difficult for some because of their situations, and we should allow people the space to work effectively in the way that works for them, I would say.
Yeah, I'll echo that. It's the mindfulness that everyone's situation is completely different. You know, we're all in the same storm, but in different boats, and everyone works in different ways, and they should be allowed and be supported in doing so, and encouraged to do so.
Yeah.
Great. And in regards to probably the last question that we're going to be able to do today, how would you help? And it's probably open to Tim and Rick, as I can see it's already given an answer to this question, which is a very detailed answer, which is great. How would you help with someone struggling to make that transition back to the office? So we'll start with you, Rick.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? You know, we've been surveying our people based on, what do you want to happen? And a small proportion can't wait to get back to the office, can't, just need that social interaction throughout the workday. A few of our people, the thought of ever going back to the office horrifies them, and they absolutely want to work from home forever. And the majority of our people want to find some space in the middle. And I think, what's absolutely key, coming back to, I think Tim and Ulrich and myself have kind of made the point about recognizing the individual, is not to have the template. There will be some people who perhaps they've been shielding up until this point in lockdown, and at some point, an organization going, right, we're all going back to the office next week, would absolutely horrify that person. How the anxiety it would cause in terms of how would you deal with getting there, dealing, all of that. What a horrible situation to put someone in. So I think, we should recognize that the anxiety about going back to the office and not going back to the office is very real. And I thoroughly expect that the market sort of demand, for talented people in the marketplace will move towards a flexible situation where people can come together in offices at the right time to collaborate, work together, and that they can have time at home to get on with stuff as well. And that's what we're preparing for. And the message that allows us to give is that we're not going to force anyone into a template. There's not going to be a blanket answer for the organization. We've got constraints. We work with clients who have specific needs. Some industries need to be in certain places, all of that. And we'll work with each of our people with respect to their specific circumstances and commercial circumstances. But I think the main thing is just not to give that blanket answer, not to expect an email that says, right, we're all going back next week, figure out what to do with your kids and your pets, we're getting on with it. That's absolutely not what people need as a sort of smooth exit.
Great, thank you, Rick. And quickly, Tim, your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, we have sort of nominally reopened our offices now, but it is entirely on if you need to go in because, there are people who are just like, I'm desperate to get back in the office, I need to get out. It's now there. In no way are we mandating that people need to go. And I think as whatever the new normal is comes around, again, I think you have to look at each individual. Rick's point about anxiety and very closely linked with depression, and literally everyone on the planet right now has gone through the ringer because we're in a situation that is scary and unknown. And I don't care who you are, this has affected you mentally. It's affected me mentally, it absolutely has. And it's difficult. It's difficult to deal with at times because it's such a big thing that you can't control. And we have to be so sort of focused on individuals and what their individual needs are to be able to keep our, to keep business going and keep work going and keep, we have to be flexible right now. And being rigid in any way is just going to fail. It's that kind of like, be flexible, bend in the wind, don't be rigid and snap.
Yeah. And I think that it presents an opportunity for companies that perhaps have been rigid in the past. This is a perfect opportunity to, to get into not being like that any longer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
This is a very, very good opportunity to change your culture.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, and definitely encourage people to do that and be more flexible and be kind. Be good to each other.
Yeah, and I think I obviously want to thank Tim, Ulrich, and Rick for giving us a great point of view. I think everybody who's tuned in can take everything away, especially even myself, taking away from what you guys have said. Again, if there's any burning questions that you might not want to put on here or any that wasn't answered, please feel free to message Tim and Rick and Ulrich direct. They're more than happy to answer your questions. Again, one more time, thank you, Ulrich, Rick and Tim. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll see you all in the next one. All right,
Pleasure.
Thank you very much. Guys.
Thank you.
Thanks all.